So just want to say a real welcome. This is a talk about the 7 practices for sustainable success. And it's really a discussion on future fit, how to be future fit and flourish in a complex and accelerating world. And with so much information being written, spoken, and delivered through an AI chatbots, what are the key practices that truly do move the human flourishing dial? What can we actually control? So Alan's going to talk us about that. If you've got any questions, just put your hand up, either old-fashioned style, i.e. put your hand up, or one of those fancy Fandoogle things on the bottom of your screen. That will work equally well. We're going to try and get through as much as we can, just the Alan's presentation. But if you've got a question you want to ask, then please do put your hand up and we will come to you. So without any ado, please welcome Dr. Alan Watkins.
Thank you very much, Katie. And hello to everybody, either listening live or listening on catch up or whenever you're playing this. It's a question that's front of mind a lot for me, which is in a society that's obsessed with success of some measure, how do we actually quantify that? So before we even talk about what are the practices to sustain your success, we need to even have a little think about, well, what do we mean by success? Do we mean health, wealth, and happiness? Do we mean meaning, mastery, maturity? What do we mean? And of course, sadly, far too many people define their success in purely financial terms. So there's actually some interesting research on that. If you look at the research in the US, there was a study on about 1.7 million people, which suggests you need about $60,000 or £47,000 to be happy or to have emotional well-being. And the peak of satisfaction in life, according to the US study, $95,000 or £74,000. And beyond these 2 points, £47,000, £74,000, an increase in money doesn't actually make you any happier or any more satisfied with life. So it sort of plateaus. So it's kind of interesting that people want more and more and more money, want to generate more and more cash for themselves, but it doesn't make you happier. I mean, money can't buy happiness. We all know that. And we certainly know money can't buy your love. So why are we so obsessed by the financial metric? If you look in the research in the UK, it suggests that everything peaks at about £120,000. That's the UK research, so a higher figure than you see in the US. And beyond that, no more happiness, no more sense of fulfillment, no more sense of well-being. If you look at the data from the Nordics, and of course there's the World Happiness Report, which many of you may be aware of, which repeatedly cites the Nordics as the happiest place on earth. And when you dig below the surface, a lot of that's to do with social networks, security in society, and social equality as key factors. And so it's really important. One of the other things that came out of that research is we mustn't play the richer or poorer game. So you see many people at work sort of comparing salaries. And of course, that's a route to unhappiness, you know, that somebody feels they're missing out, this sort of fear of FOMO, which of course has been amplified by social media. So happiness and fulfillment and well-being, you need a certain amount of money to achieve the peak of those things, beyond which it doesn't really matter. So if we dig into other types of research, there was some very interesting research that I came across when I was a med student. Of course, in any kind of academic research, you often start with the negative. So there was something some of you may be aware of called life event research in the 1970s. And this was the idea that if you had a divorce, a bereavement, if you moved house, if you had a new job, you go down a list of things that could happen to you, negative things that could happen to you in life. And if you ticked off too many boxes, you would get ill. So that was called life event research. And then it sort of morphed into something called type A and type B personality disorder, where certain people who were really in pursuit of these things with a vengeance, you know, the successful things in life, The type Bs seem to get less cardiovascular disease than the type As. So eventually all of that focus on the negative, what made you ill, flipped to a more positive type of research with Aronofsky's resistance resources, or Karen Kolbassa's hardiness research. And of course, hardiness was the sort of forerunner to what we now call resilience. And Karen identified 3 factors that if you could control the destiny of your life, and you woke up every morning with a sense of commitment to what was going on, and you saw life's problems as a challenge, you'd live a lot longer. And so there's all this sort of research in the background of, what do we really mean? Do we mean a sense of purpose in life? Do we need a sense of meaning? Do we mean health? Do we mean wealth? And so what do we need to be successful? We have to define for ourselves what we ourselves think success really is. So I'd encourage you, if you're really largely thinking in pecuniary terms, is to stretch the definition. So a life well lived, friends, family, connectivity, social connection, living in a society with lower levels of inequality, a sense of meaning, a sense of enthusiasm. It's these sorts of things that can help us define success. So with those sort of general pointers, I've picked out a few things that, in my personal view, in my observation, working with leaders around the world in the last 25 years, some of the things that characterize people who seem to be flourishing in a persistent and consistent way more than others. And of course, we have to give a nod to Stephen Covey's, 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders, which, if you look at them now, I think they're all still true. I mean, I think Covey was good, but I think the world's become more complicated. And so my view is this is an evolving recipe. And so I'd like to offer a few sort of nuanced thoughts about how to become fit for the future as a human being in a world that's changing and complicated and turbulent and chaotic. How do you maintain your happiness when everything keeps changing? So the first one I'd like to call out is something I call polymathic fossicking. So fossicking, are those that know me, I talk about fossicking a lot. It's a lovely Australian term. I used to live in Australia, and in the red center of Australia, you can kick around in the red dust and sand of Alice Springs and discover a $10,000 emerald literally in the dirt. This idea is called fossicking. It's kind of like panning for nuggets. And so I think people who are very good at fossicking, and fossicking, I think, goes beyond simple exploration or search or discovery or hunting. It's more than that. It's an exploration with serious intent, driven by a sort of pathological curiosity. So if you attack life with a sort of pathological curiosity, with some serious intent to fossick out some nuggets from every conversation, from every meeting, from every book you read. So it's kind of like a habit in and of itself, a practice to go into any conversation, any webinar, any book, any video, any film, any kind of interaction. Can you mine out something of value in that conversation? So I think people who are really good at flourishing despite any type of conditions are very good fossickers. And it's the other thing about the fossicking, it's not just fossicking in one area. It's spelled F-O-S-S-I-C-K-I-N-G, fossicking. They don't just fossick in one area, their area of interest. That's why I sent polymathic fossicking. So it's breadth and depth, people who are kind of insanely curious about a whole range of things, not just one thing. So it's the discovery of content, knowledge, insights. And with those, you can often see the truth and the reality for much more clearly. And with all of those knowledge and insights across a range, deep insights in various areas and range of insights across various areas, what ultimately happens is it cultivates a great flexibility of mind. So that's the first quality, Katie, I think, this polymathic fossicking, an insane curiosity with intention to search far and wide and mine out some content and some insights. So imagine you do that. Imagine you were really good at extracting value from any interaction. that insight and that knowledge and is worth nothing if you then, my second quality is playful application. So it's the ability to put that into practice, to get those nuggets and insight and use them. So I think people who do that don't just deploy those insights, they often evaluate the usefulness of the nuggets they extract. So it's not enough to just extract a nugget. How useful is that nugget? So if you can also cultivate a practice of assessing the usefulness of those nuggets, you can then take the best nuggets and leave the rest, as you yourself often say, Katie. So, and I think the deployment is a kind of an experimentation. And I'd really encourage people to experiment in a sort of playful, unbound and unconstrained way. I mean, you see children naturally do this, is they try things, they test things. And of course, as adults, we often lose that playfulness and that unbound, unconstrained. And so, that's why I say it's a playful application of the insights, a sort of youthful usefulness, if you will. So playful experimentation often results in the convolution. So convolution is a neuroscience term. It's where you blend together two seemingly unrelated ideas to create a new idea, to spawn even more insights, even more nuggets. And actually, I like the idea of convolution because it's really the secret of comedy, subject close to my heart. Not taking life too seriously, but if you can mix two things that wouldn't normally be common bedfellows, it often creates even further interest or a point of humor. So fossicking followed by application. And then in that application, there's a sort of third factor that relates to that, which is you apply things, but can you join the dots? So this is systemic thinking. So polymathic fossicking, playful application, systemic thinking. So that's really the ability to see patterns, identify the patterns. So as you do the experiments and results come up from those experiments or new insights, how do you put Humpty Dumpty back together again? How do you put all these pieces back together again? And I was talking to a client last week, and they were talking about their boss who had this unbelievable mind and his ability to remember things that were said in passing in a conversation 6 months ago. They're saying, how does he do that? And I said, well, there's something called in memory research called the palace of the mind, where you create a sort of visual palace and you have many houses in this palace and you store some of these insights and knowledge in the different houses of your mind. So if you create a palace of the mind and you find all these little pieces of the jigsaw, these insights, these truths, these bits of knowledge, and you know where to put them, you start to construct this palace of your mind and make connections between these things. And the mind does that naturally. So the real practice for flourishing is to architect the palace, is to proactively work with all these things and build frames in your mind, frames of understanding, frames of explanation, joined together with powerful narratives, powerful metaphors to reinforce anyway. So this is doing what the mind does naturally, but on steroids. So if we actively prune and tidy and integrate just to keep it fresh and alive, because knowledge and insights change and evolve. So I think if we fossick, we apply, and then we join the dots, there are three ways of really accelerating the quality and speed and insightfulness of our own minds. So when the world changes, our ability to make sense of that is hugely enhanced. So we're not helpless in the face of change and turbulence and chaos. We ourselves can become very adept and skillful and sophisticated in handling a changing world, which leads me to the fourth quality, the idea of endless evolution. So imagine you've done the experiments and you've started to create patterns and interpretations and sense making out of your experimentation. It's then really helpful to meditate. You can just sit and think and reflect. And what you're really doing is those are moments of consolidation where you convert what you've learned into real evolutionary progress. This is what we call converting L into D, learning into development. And converting learning into development requires you to deploy, to see the patterns, and to really bake that into your system. So knowledge itself isn't worth very much if we don't deploy, and we don't reflect on that deployment and hone that deployment and really consolidate. So the endless evolution is, in my view, the primary hope for humanity is that we'll evolve faster than the change of the world, because if we don't, we won't get ahead of some of the wicked problems of climate change and poverty and all these other things. We've got to get faster. We've got to get smarter. So we've got to drive our own evolution and build greater capacity for compassion, greater capacity for care, greater capacity for problem solving, and so on. So quality number 4 of the 7 habits is this commitment to endless evolution. And so a couple of others before I sort of open the floor for, challenge and question and so on. I've noticed that many leaders just work hard. So I wanted to call that quality. It's not a very sexy quality, but just putting more energy and time and effort in than the person next to you. Of course, every fiber in your body might want to put your feet up and take it easy. But in my experience, some of the best ways of flourishing over time is just put a lot of effort in. And I remember some time ago when I worked with the GB rowing squad before the 2012 London Olympics and 2016 in Rio. As many may know, the most successful Olympian in GB history is Steve Redgrave. And there was an interesting quality that Steve wrote about in his book about how he would just pour all the energy he could. And even if in the first round he was 4 or 5 lengths up on the competition, he would still pour energy in to try and beat them, not by 4 lengths, but by 6 lengths. And people used to question him about that. And he said, well, I do that and, I'm not going to take it easy, which is what you're encouraging me to do, save my energy for the next round or the semi-final or the final, for 2 reasons. Number one, if I beat people comprehensively, I'm really training them to come second, because they start to learn. There's no chance of them winning, so they might as well just fight for second. But it's the second reason that I highlight here. He said energy begets energy. If I train my system when I get 2 or 3 lengths up to start taking it easy, in the final, I might do the same. And so I'm training my system to create a positive reinforcement loop of energy begets energy. So just putting more energy in, more time in, and more effort in. And this goes to a factor that other people have written around about practice as a discipline itself. And as you know, Malcolm Gladwell popularized the idea of actually, if you just put 10,000 hours more practice in than anybody else in the world, you will become world class. And of course, that's not really true. There's a sort of nugget of truth to that, because if it was true that practice makes perfect, when any of us go on a driving range to hit a bucket of balls, we'd get better every year. And of course, most golfers never get better. So it's not true to say that practice makes perfect. What we now understand that it's a certain type of practice, i.e. you have to understand the nature of sophisticated practice. Just hitting a ball doesn't help you improve at all. So what you see, the professional golfers, when they stand on the driving range for 3 hours, they're not just hitting a bucket of balls like the amateurs are. They've deconstructed their swing into 17 separate pieces, and they spend 3 hours just adjusting one piece, maybe how their wrist is rotated at the top of their swing. That's all they're doing. And the next time they look at the speed of the descent to the ball. And then the time after that, they look at how the club face meets the ball, i.e. they've deconstructed the entire complex behavior into 17 separate pieces, and they're honing the practice of every single piece and then joining the dots. So that's called chaining. So it's a quality of practice. It's the ability to deconstruct anything complicated into its component parts, put it all back together hone each piece and then put all the pieces back together. So that's very, very sophisticated practice. Now, you wouldn't realize that unless you'd actually put some effort in. So I look around me and I look at people who really have lived a fantastic life and really made a great contribution. And as those of you that know me, one of my personal heroes is Joseph Campbell. In fact, one of my sons is called Joseph after Joseph Campbell. But what was interesting about Joseph Campbell's life, and for those of you that don't know, he's the guy that kind of inspired George Lucas to write Star Wars. He was a self-taught man. He grew up in America in the 1930s when there was a Great Depression. And for 5 or 6 years, there were literally no jobs. But fortunately, he lived in rural America and lived on a farm, so he had food. But for 8 hours a day, Campbell read books. For 8 hours a day for 5 years. I mean, he studied. He studied and studied, and he became the world expert, the #1 expert in the world on mythology and also on comparative religion. So, I've seen that really brilliant people, they're so curious, they just keep studying, they just keep putting the effort in, year after year. And that requires a kind of iron discipline and the ability to endure and sustain and an passion to succeed. And so if you look at interviews with Muhammad Ali, for course, he famously said when he was interviewed by Michael Parkinson about, being the greatest. And Parkinson asked him, well, what would you have done if you'd not done boxing? He said, I don't know, but even if I'd have been a road sweep, I'd have been the greatest road sweep. So it's that passion, it's that energy, it's a passion for life, a commitment to life, as Karen Kulbasa would say. You play full on, you bring an intensity to every moment of your life. And that requires you to manage your energy very well, of course. So I think that's the fifth quality, a much underrated quality, is just putting a lot of effort in and a lot of passion and a lot of ambition. And then there's a couple of other final qualities I wanted to call out, Katie, is a lot of those qualities are really to do with ourselves, I qualities, if you will. But of course, none of us live in a cave. We live in the context of other human beings. And I honestly think some of the, not only in terms of giving our life meaning, our life is often imbued with meaning in the we space, in the interpersonal dimension. So I think, for flourishing as a human being, we are social animals. We are collaborative by nature. It is who we are. I mean, human beings, Homo sapiens and bacteria, the two most successful species on the planet, ironically for the same reason, is we've learned to collaborate. It's literally who we are. And so if you walk down a street in a major city, you don't see too many gangs of human beings all trying to kill each other. You go into the jungle and tribes of apes or mammals often are very combative, but human beings have kind of learned to get on. We follow road safety rules and we don't crash our cars into each other, unless we're playing a video game. So there's this sort of social dimension. And so just to unpack that, it's not just being social. I think a compassion for humanity is a really important practice. Life is complicated, life is difficult, and this sort of compassion for humanity manifests in very different ways in different people, depending on their own purpose. So I think recognizing the difficulty and complexity of life and being able to deal with a wide range of people in a non-judgmental fashion is incredibly important. So people that do this well, have empathic, what we call empathic connecting. They connect with lots of different types of people, quite easily. And this kind of slightly relates to one of the things Stephen Covey said, which I think is great, which is first seek to understand before you try and be understood. So it's what we call in coaching the shift from me to we. So as we grow up and mature, hopefully with some of those first 5 practices, we become slightly less excited and enamored with ourselves, and we start to fall in love with other people. So we move from me to we. If we can become a little bit more compassionate, relating to other people, and do that in a non-judgmental fashion and develop our emotional intelligence and interpersonal skills, and really sort of enjoy the myriad of human expressions. I mean, it would be very, very boring world if everybody was identical to us. I mean, what makes life interesting is people are different to ourselves. And the more that we can be fascinated by that and enjoy that and wonder about that, that actually is what often makes a situation very interesting. So, I love people with strong opinions, and I particularly enjoy people with opinions different to my own. So I'm rather throwing the ball open there for somebody to kind of completely disagree with me on this, but it's kind of interesting, because sometimes, we all like to think that we've nailed it or we've understood something, and it's only through being profoundly challenged that it stretches our thinking to go, actually, there's something I might have been missing there. I might have not quite understood that. So sometimes that challenge and being able to relate to different points of view without taking it personally is a real skill in and of itself. So I think if one expands that compassion for humanity, it very easily gets into a desire to be of service. So I think flourishing in the long term, is, I heard this term recently, which I really love, called effective altruism. So if you're going to be of service, where is the place where you can be of greatest service? So if you're going to donate time or even money to charity, evaluate which charity is doing the, moving the dial the most. So make sure your altruism is effective. Don't just, drop a coin in some box and think, you've done anything useful. That's ineffective altruism. Get stuck in, hard work, passion, bring everything. And really pick your battles, pick where you want to spend your time, your money, your effort, your energy, and try and make it as effective as possible. I mean, the Buddhists have a lovely word for this type of attitude. They call it a bodhisattva, which is, being of service, being more concerned about helping others than helping yourself. Other researchers call it being pro-social. So I think that's a really an important quality that we need to cultivate, because it's who we are. We're collaborative by nature. And there's this lovely quote from the French Jesuit priest, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. And he said, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. And I think that's really lovely, because it sort of expands the way that we think about ourselves. Human beings sort of struggling to be human and maybe expand and have a transcendent experience. But if we flip it around and go, well, no, actually, it's really the other way around, is we're truly trying to understand what it means to be alive, the joy of being a human being. So I think there's something really rich in that, is a sort of compassion for humanity. And then finally, something that's close to my heart, because I grew up with a father who taught me this. I mean, he was many things, complicated, brilliant, and terrible at the same time. But what I learned from him is the art and the importance of storytelling. So compelling storytelling, and it goes to this idea that we don't live in a cave. We have to relate to each other. And so the ability to tell a compelling story, the ability to inspire change, the ability to provoke, but in a skillful way, to provoke new thoughts, new ideas, new thinking, I think is a critical quality in sustaining success and flourishing. And it sort of brings many of these other qualities together: the ability to join the dots, the ability to fossick out nuggets, the ability to then deploy those nuggets. So if we can become great communicators and great storytellers, then I think that's a route to flourishing. And of course, looping us back round to the idea of humor. I mean, the greatest storytellers, of course, are often comedians, because I've learned an awful lot through watching stand-up comics do their stuff. It's really gifted communication, pace, timing, joining ideas together, either for the purpose of making somebody laugh or just telling a story. So I think, compelling storytelling is the seventh quality. And of course, being able to relate that, we see very much the comics of today, do it as a personal narrative from observing life. So if we can speak from personal experience without being self-promotional, that's a real gift. And the energy that you bring to the moment, that sort of nourishing personal presence, as it's called. So if we can be compelling storytellers, have a compassion for others, put a lot of hard work in, commit ourselves to endless evolution, develop our ability to think systemically, be playful in our application, and fossick deep and wide, then I think we're setting ourselves up for flourishing despite what happens in the world.
Wow. Well, that's quite a menu, I have to say, and I'm sure there's some people clapping. I'm sure people have got a lot to think about there. One thing you said, I think it was under the hard work banner, maybe this says more about me than anything else, is the direct management of high levels of energy. You almost did that as a kind of sub-bullet, but that's a whole lifetime's work in itself, right?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, things are difficult and become a lifetime's work if you haven't got good guidance. And it takes you ages to figure this out. But once you discover, it's not as difficult. None of these things are as difficult as you think. So that's why the quality of guides, people who can actually help you, is critically important. So it will take a lifetime if you're stumbling around in the dark. But the good news is a lot of people have discovered how to do this now. And we live in an age now on the internet where the wisdom of every single tradition on the planet is available to all of us. We're kind of overwhelmed with this. So it's not, access is no longer the problem. I mean, roll back the clock 300 years, there were wisdom traditions and there was secret sect, and it was in a little bound book in a church somewhere or some, spiritual home somewhere, and you couldn't get access to it. But now all that stuff is available to all of us. So it's not about access anymore, it's about interpretation. And so it's finding people who can help you make sense of all these insights, many of which have been known for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So the secret, I think, is finding a good guide who can help you make sense of these things and put it all together. So I think that itself is quite a skill, because many people put themselves out there as the guide, as they can take you, but they themselves haven't done the journey. So all they can really do is take you round and round the mulberry bush at the same level. They can't help you ascend or increase your depth or your wisdom. So finding a guide or finding somebody to help you make sense is the quickest way of not having to spend your entire life figuring out stuff like energy management. Energy management, as you know, is actually a lot more straightforward than you realize once you know what to do. It's a bit like in the early days of computing, when we were all sort of stumbling around in the dark, and then somebody said, when the screen freezes, just press Control Alt Delete. Oh my God, that solved the whole thing, or F5, oh, that's done it. Oh, thank you very much. Or if you tried turning it on and off, those kind of ideas. And we were struggling for hours, throwing the keyboard down, punching the screen. And then somebody shows you F5 and suddenly it all works. So that's the sort of basic idea. It's finding people who know what the F5 key really does and shortcutting that pain and difficulty. So I think that's important too.
In that wisdom, nobody's put their hand up at the moment. I just wonder whether I could do what I always do in large groups of people.
I know Alex has his hand raised.
Oh, it was the threat of silence, I think, which did it. Alex, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head, Alan, about energy management and energy. Yet the whole world is full of time management, and they're still talking about time management, and business is full of that. And how about sharing some tips about actually developing your energy management? Because that, I think, is key to all of the other things that you have, because we are suffering from that.
Okay, got it. So then John's got a question. So it's kind of ironic to me that we go on and on about time management, because, if you've got a project to do, and I give you another 3 weeks to do it, if you're absolutely exhausted and you've got no energy, You still won't get it done. So we do time management courses. Of course, time is never the problem. I know a lot of people think it's the problem, but when we misattribute the problem to time, what we're really saying it's prioritization is the real issue. And underneath that is energy. So, energy is a much more important asset to us than time. Because if we haven't got enough energy, we can't do anything. It doesn't matter how clever we are, how smart we are, we're completely exhausted, we can't do it. So in that regard, getting good at energy management, first of all, starts by noticing, where's our energy coming from? Where's it going? Do we even notice? So most people start their day with a certain amount of energy and then leak their energy out, meeting by meeting. And by the end of the day, tired. And we're only tired at the end of the day because we haven't managed our energy well. So it's leak, knackered. I mean, that's the pattern that most people run, but it is possible when you get good at energy management to be just as energetic at the end of the day as you were at the start of the day. You just got to get good at it. And so that starts with noticing where do you get energy from and where do you lose energy? And then, of course, plugging the leaks in the, energy losses and amplifying, compound interesting, if you will, the deposits in your energy bank account. So if you go on our app, which you can download for free, the complete-app.com, complete-app.com, you can download it for free. There's what's called an e-bank skill, where you actually start, like a bank account, you start to keep a record of where's the energy coming from, where's it going, do you see the pattern? If you see the pattern, what's your conclusion and what's your action? So you can just start doing these types of things where you get really very good. And so now, as you know, Alex, you've known me for a while, I have a different problem. I don't have a problem of energy management. I have too much energy. And that can be overwhelming for others, right? So you're in a different space, but, keeping a track of it. So John, you have a question?
Greetings. Thank you. I love that you brought in humor to it, because it is truly essential. I love stand-up comedy as well. And the storytelling factor, right? And if we're going to mention Joseph Campbell, right? What did he keep underscoring? Good storytelling, good storytelling.
Yeah.
So to that, it helped me connect a dot, particularly in our intense times, like bringing some humor into presentations, and not just like go humor, but things to lighten the intensity of what we're facing. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, just climate change alone, what an overwhelming concept, right? People just short circuit at the mention, right?
Yeah.
So just wanted to thank you for that, and then ask you, what are 2 or 3 of your favorite stand-up comics?
Well, I used to love, and I learned a lot from Eddie Izzard in the early days, not so much of late. Just the sort of sophistication. In fact, many years ago in Manchester Airport, we were having this conversation about the sophistication of comics, and we actually constructed a developmental scale for comics, starting at the bottom, with vulgar, well, it starts with sort of physical comedy, slapstick, and then you get it into vulgar humor and punning, and then up the scale towards the top, you get sort of the Eddie Izzards and the Tim Minchins of this world. You go through the cognitive sophistication to, or clever comedy, and then you get to this sort of surreal comedy that Eddie Izzard used to do. So if you haven't seen it, the Death Star Canteen sketch, of course, is probably one of his most famous pieces, where he's got, Darth Vader in a queue for some lunch, which of course you never saw in the Star Wars movie, but wouldn't that be funny? And he tells this whole skit. It's hysterical if you haven't seen it. So I like that I like all sorts of humor, because I think it's just really powerful communication. But I particularly enjoy those with flights of fancy. And I learned a lot of things from Eddie Izzard. Like, he told a story in his Dress to Kill tour. He said, I'll just repeat it here very briefly. He said, I heard this terrible news on the way to the theater, which is a classic comedic setup. Terrible news on the way to the theater. He said, Engelbert Humperdinck's died. And of course, everybody laughs. And he sort of takes fake offense. What are you laughing for? The man's dead. And then there's a sort of much smaller laugh out of embarrassment. And he goes, no, I'm just kidding. A big laugh. And then he was playing with the audience for about 45 seconds with actually it's true. No, it's not true. Yes, it is true. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. And you saw him start, and he started to mute his body language until eventually he was saying nothing for 45 seconds, and he was getting people to laugh with a raise of a, he was literally going up and down with his eyebrows and getting a laugh on it. And that is unbelievable control of your audience. And that sort of taught me a lot, that, that you could really connect with people, even with incredibly subtle things, and hold them in the palm of your hand. So those are the kind of folks I love to watch, but ultimately I love all. What about yourself, John? Who's your favorite comic?
Oh, good question. Well, I've always admired Robin Williams.
Flights of Fancy, right?
Right. And then the capacity to improv that way, right? Just go out and allow it to come versus having something prearranged.
Yeah, indeed.
I mean, that's where life gets really beautiful, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to that end, I love.
And in the UK, Sean Locke. Sorry, what did you say?
I was just going to ask Alex to follow that one. I'm just worried about the time. I've got a number of questions to come in.
Yes.
So.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity for polymathic fossicking and playful application. So in the spirit of that, I do have a question. So a lot of these habits are relating to doing, thinking, feeling a little bit as well. And I wondered, like, where you would situate the kind of being part as a habit or a factor for sustainable success. So, and whether that is just in terms of being conscious of our being and noticing how we are and at different times and with different emotions, right through to activity and moving our bodies, which is something that, I find indispensable and never fails as a habit for sustainable success.
It's a great question. So for me, the fossicking doesn't require you to even move. Sometimes you're fossicking, you might just be sitting there fossicking your own mind, reflecting on an experience you've had. So when I was a junior doctor, and I've told this story before, training as a physician is an incredible thing, because you often are in the room at the best day of somebody's life and the worst day. And I was, as a junior doctor, often in the room at the point of somebody passing. And it's quite a profound moment. And just being there. And many doctors shut down because it's a difficult thing to deal with. But it gave me a profound appreciation for being alive, first and foremost, or just for being. So I would often, when somebody passed, would have to just sit in the room for 3 or 4 minutes. And many of my colleagues would go, oh, the guy's died. Oh, dear. All right, well, lunch. And then they would just literally shut down and clear off. And I would sit and reflect on that in that sort of moment. Like, what's this moment teaching me? And it gave me a really profound appreciation, Alex, for the joy of being alive and the beauty of being alive and what a gift it is. So it doesn't, fossicking, even though it's an active sounding word, can simply be reflecting on some of your own experiences, being with your own thoughts, being with your own feelings, and fossicking from your own data sources, not necessarily, going out in the world and discovering stuff. And again, being in your own mind and figuring stuff out, experiencing, things arising, things joining, and, so if you meditate a lot, which is a kind of, most people would consider it a being practice, sometimes watching the tides of your mind ebb and flow, things arise, things coalesce and disconnect and reconnect and all that kind of stuff. So I wouldn't want to create the impression that all of it was about doing. It's that beautiful interplay between, doing, being, and relating. So it's all up at the same time.
Just on that point, Ursula said there's a recent publication of one of the Berkeley scientists, Dacher Keltner, on ore, contains some lovely nuggets for mining and fossicking. Love that word. And then Mike H is asking a question, Alan. Given Alan's presentations talking about success and happiness, what's Alan's view on the relevance of the Harvard study, which has been running approximately 85 years, refers at the end of life, the happiness of the subjects being primarily driven by close personal relationships, spouse, partner. And in business, is culture the equivalent version of the relevance of community or of our tribe, i.e. the people we spend most of our time with?
It's a great question, Mike. And it's often said that we are just the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. So be careful who you're spending your time with. You know? I can't remember whose quote that is, but
Eric,
yes.
I think it's Eric Waugh, isn't it? I think Eric Waugh is the guy that first came up with that.
Right, exactly. And so what's interesting about, you know, are we only as happy as the people we spend our time with? I mean, there's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that love and happiness is contagious in a community. I mean, it spreads across a community. So angry communities, you know, distribute anger. You know, caring communities distribute care. So it sort of moves almost sort of in the ether between people. But what's very interesting, as you know, the data in pretty much most developed country in the world is the divorce rate is 50%. So we've still got an awful lot to learn. And there is no doubt quite a bit of evidence to suggest longevity of life and happiness in life and fulfillment in life is hugely underpinned by a wonderful personal relationship. But sadly, you know, people don't seem, you know, 50% of all people who get married get divorced, don't seem to be able to sustain that. And of course, if you look at the divorce rate in second marriages, it's even higher, and in third marriages, even higher still. So it's like those that get divorced get worse at it. And so we still got plenty of things to learn as human beings in our ability to relate to each other. And in fact, we often talk in the business about the we space being the final frontier, to co-opt a Star Trek metaphor, is human beings, whilst collaborative by nature, have still got tons to learn. So if we can become a little bit more pro-social, move from the me to we stance and get better at that relationships, I think there's really a lot of joy and happiness and fulfillment to be mined out in our personal relationships, home and work. And so I think the corporate equivalent is in the corporate culture. But it's been my experience working for 25 years with corporations, is it's one of the most misunderstood concepts in business, you know, because it's super complicated. You know, many companies talk about cultural transformation, but they don't even understand the basic building blocks of culture. So I think there's a lot to learn. There's a lot we can do a lot better at, and it's not as difficult. And again, my point earlier about, you know, with quality guidance, you can actually make substantial progress really quickly in improving cultures, you know, moving from toxic cultures to high performance cultures, if you know and understand the phenomena of culture and how to evolve it and improve it.
We're getting towards the end of our time now. Is there any last burning questions that anybody wants to ask? Okay. I just want to say that thank you very much for your time today. Hopefully it's been thought-provoking and got you to think about things through a slightly different lens, as always. Completely going to offer these webinars from time to time, so please do check in on LinkedIn. We don't know exactly when the next one's going to be, but we will promote that as soon as we do know. So thanks a lot for attending. Get in touch if you've got any questions, stay in touch, and thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Have a great day.